Okay, welcome aboard today. This week we have Parshas Ki Savoy. The Parsha of the week in our class is not going to be discussed as much as it may have usually been. This week instead, we are going to discuss the procedure of the Jewish calendar, how the Jewish calendar is established, and other interesting things about it. Now, why are we talking about the Jewish calendar today? Because in just a few days is going to be Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, and the coming New Year is actually a leap year, a Jewish leap year. So we need to understand, why do Jews need to have a leap year? Now, you know that the Gregorian calendar has a leap year every couple of years with a change of 1 day. Every 4 years with a change of 1 day. 1 day in 4 years. The Jewish calendar, we have our leap year comes around sometimes it can be every other year. Sometimes it's on a fourth year. It changes in a 19-year cycle. And the big question is, why do we A, follow a lunar calendar? B, why do we need to calibrate our calendar with the lunar calendar, with the solar calendar? And of course, we want to find a lesson in our service of God that is relevant to us from this conversation. Well, we're discussing this now because the Jewish calendar is defined already in advance, much in advance. It's been planned. There was a lovely fellow whose name was Sadia Gaon, and he became famous for establishing the Jewish calendar. Now, if you are an absolute Talmud geek, or better said, if you're a professor in Talmudics, then you might know that in the back of one of the volumes of the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, the big volumes, you can find the system for calculating the calendar. That, go figure, when you can get your hands on that book and figure out what to do with it, awesome. But we're going to do some of the introductory stuff to that conversation. Number one, let's go to part A, the Jewish calendar. What makes a month? So source number one, it comes from Shmois, the book of Exodus, chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. And let's ask Carla if you'll read for us the 2 verses, and on which there is 2 comments from Rashi. Rashi is the foremost commentator on all of Tanakh text, the Pentateuch, the prophets and the writings, the 5 books of Moses. And in this case, Rashi tells us something which we're going to work on. So please, Carla, take it away. Tell us source number 1 from Exodus chapter 12, verses 1 and 2.
God said to Moses and Aaron in Egypt, "This month shall be the head month to you. It shall be the first month of the year." Rashi says this month, in Hebrew, the word Kadesh literally means renewal. God showed Moses the moon in its renewal and said to him, "When the moon renews itself, you will have a new month." Moses found difficulty determining the precise moment of the renewal of the moon, in what size it should appear before it is fit for sanctification. So God showed him with his finger the moon in the sky and said,
a quick look at the Hebrew word for month. In the second verse, the first Hebrew word is chodesh, ches, daled, shin. Now, what is the Hebrew word for new? The Hebrew word for new is chadash or chidush. Well, chodesh and chidush have the exact same letters. And that is because they have a very strong connection. Just as the moon goes through a cycle and renews itself monthly, so too there are new things. There are new things all the time. The month comes new, and such we call the month a new thing. Now, we all know that the moon itself has no light of its own. It's just a reflection of the sun. So when the sun stands between earth and the sun, so when the moon is between the earth and the sun, one of the sides is going to be dark and the other side is going to be light. As the orbit continues, the reflection changes. And from your vantage point, you see a different view. Do you guys have the colorful picture? You do, right? So you can see in that diagram how there are, the waning crescent and the waxing crescent, the first quarter, the last quarter, the full moon. This is part of the cycle of the moon. So Hashem tells Moses, God tells Moses that a full rotation of the moon, that's going to be called a month. By the way, check up the etymology of the word moon, and you can trace it back to the word month, and vice versa. You can trace month back to moon. These two words are actually related. Now you're wondering, why does Rashi need to tell us this is what Moses, that this is what you should see and you should sanctify it? Tells me that Moses was actually having a hard time. He was having a hard time identifying what a part of the moon looks like, how much of the moon needs to be seen by the time you're able to establish a new moon. And so God told him, this is exactly what it looks like. Now, let me ask you this. How long does it take for the moon to rotate for the monthly orbit? It's 29 days, 12 hours, and approximately 44 minutes. Okay, let's simplify that. We don't want to be too complicated. Complicated is good, but not so. So we say 29 days and a half. And so effectively it's 29 and a half. It's either 29 or 30. It fluctuates every month, etc. Now, so what do we have? Times 29 or 30 by 12, and you end up with 354. Remember, how many days in a solar calendar? 365. There's a discrepancy. 354 in the lunar calendar, 365 in the second in the solar calendar. There's a discrepancy going on, and that brings us to source number 2, the Mishnah Torah, the Rambam, Hilchos Kiddush HaChodesh, the laws of sanctifying the new moon, said to be some of the more complicated laws in the Rambam's magnum opus, in a collection of all Jewish law in his time. And here it goes. The moon, let's ask somebody to read. Juan, will you read for us, please? Source number 2, this first paragraph there.
The moon becomes hiding and cannot be seen for approximately 2 days, or slightly less or slightly more, every month. Approximately 1 day before its conjunction with the sun at the end of the month, and 1 day after its conjunction with the sun before. It is sighted in the west in the evening. The first night when the moon is sighted in the west after being hidden in the beginning of the month. Afterward, 29 days are counted from that day.
Thank you, Juan. So what do we have? Now we have the solar calendar, right? Now we have the solar calendar has an orbit that goes through 4 seasons: there's summer, winter, spring, and fall. And this takes 365 days. And the users of such a calendar artificially, arbitrarily divided into 12 months. And effectively, each month is either 30 or 31 days. And so is there any real significance in the division of the months? Are you going to tell me that it's important for August to have 31 days for a specific reason? It's going to be tough. What are the pros and cons of the calendar? Well, the Gregorian calendar follows a specific schedule. Every month you can expect that June is going to be a hot month. And you can expect that December is going to be cold and dark. And if you're in Georgia, you can expect that the whole July, it's going to be raining. And if you're in Australia, you can expect that the whole January, it'll be baking hot. So that's predictable. The lunar calendar, it doesn't work like that, because if you divide 354 by 12 and then you just rotate it, what ends up happening is that 1 month will be during the winter, and then in the next year it'll be 11 days earlier, which means it'll be a bit earlier into fall, and then before that it'll be in the middle of summer, and before that it'll be somewhere in the middle of spring. Like we're aware, the month of Ramadan on the Islamic calendar, following the lunar calendar, can fall out at different times every year. And sometimes it's tough to keep that full day fast because you're fasting on a long summer day. And sometimes it's easy to keep the fast because it's a short winter day. That's how the lunar calendar goes. The Jewish calendar has a different way to set itself up, because the Jewish calendar needs to have a calibration of holidays in specific seasons. Let's take a look at source 3 from the volume of Shmos, the second book of the 5 books of Moses, chapter 34, verse 18. Diana, will you please read for us the English side of this source number 3? You need to unmute yourself.
Sorry, I forgot.
Go for it.
Great. Just a minute. I'm having problems with my computer. The very old computer is temperamental. Okay. Keep the festival of matzahs. Eat matzahs for 7 days, as I commanded in the design time in the spring, because it was the spring that you left Egypt.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Diana. So you notice that it says spring. You need to keep the holiday of Matzah in the spring, which means that Hashem wants us to keep Pesach during a certain season. Now, Hashem's calendar doesn't have seasons. So now we need to recalibrate the year. So what do you reckon? Let's get some suggestions. How would you plan replacing all of these extra days? Let's get 2 suggestions from someone. Reb Shmuel, a recommendation perhaps on how you think we should calibrate this?
Well, you could add a day here or there, similar to what one does with the solar leap year, or as the Jewish calendar does, add a whole month at an appropriate time to push things seasonally where you want them.
Right. Look, if the discrepancy is only of 11 days, right? So then just add maybe a 31st day to 11 months and you're good, right? And then we'd be fine. But effectively that might take away from our lunar calendar-ness. right? So we can't exactly add days, right? Because then it loses the lunar calendar-ness. So what do we do instead? We add a month. Let's take a look. The leap year. Every 2 or 3 years, when the lunar year departs from the solar year, approximately by 30 days, we add a month to the year. These extra 30 days balance the Jewish calendar, the lunar Hebrew calendar, and we align it with the solar year. That is how we balance the 2 commandments. On one hand, we follow the months according to the moon, and on the other hand, our holiday remains in their respective seasons. With this, we jump into another piece from the Rambam. And so let's ask, Carla, will you please read for us these 2 paragraphs from Maimonides, a continuation of the Kiddush HaChodesh conversation? Source number 4. Go, please.
The months of the year are lunar months, as implied by the verse, the burnt offerings of the month when it is renewed, and this month shall be for you the first of months. Concerning this verse, our sages commented, God shows Moses in the vision of prophecy an image of the moon and told him, when you see the moon like this, sanctify it. The years we follow are solar years, as implied in the verse, keep the month of spring. How much longer is a solar year than a lunar year? Approximately 11 days. Therefore, when these additional days reach a sum of 30 or slightly
straight into the Sikha from the Rebbe, the Rebbe's speech on this topic. So we're starting on page 6, and I'm going to ask Reb Shmuel if you will please read for us the entire segment of the Sikha.
The leap year offsets the 11-day difference between the lunar and solar year. The Talmud states that Israel follows the moon, the smaller of the 2 luminaries, because the Jewish people are small as well, as the verse states, you are the smallest among the nations. Therefore, the small follow the small, and we calculate months according to the moon, beginning with the month of Nisan, which is the first of the months. However, we are also commanded to keep the month of spring to ensure that Passover is celebrated during spring and Shavuot is celebrated during the harvest and Sukkot in the fall. Although the commandment speaks specifically about Passover and spring, and the other seasons are dependent on the sun. The Torah resolves this issue by adding 1 month each 2 or 3 years, when these additional days reach a sum of 30 or slightly more or slightly less. And
Reb Shmuel, that was excellent. So we get a review on all of the sources that we've quoted. We understand why we need to calibrate the calendars, the lunar and the solar calendar. And we also discover something unique in the last paragraph of the Rebbe's quoted Sikha, that not only do we fill up the gap, we also push ourselves just a little bit forward for the future cycle, for the future round. Okay, now from here we go in a moment to section B, the sun and the moon, the deeper meaning. But before we do that, I'd like to open the floor in case someone has a question on our current conversation.
Rabbi Markovits, what before the calendar was set. So the thing is that they never had the additional month of Adar, did they?
Okay, that is a good question. Thank you for asking that question, and that actually gives us an opportunity to discuss how the calendar was set back in the good old days before Rabbi Sadia Gaon, because Rabbi Sadia Gaon was a post-Talmud personality. He was a Gaon from the Gaonim period, which means that there was at least 700 or 800 years of living in the land before he came. So how did this all work? Well, the Beis Din, this Jewish court, would have people coming on the 30th day, on the 29th day, and they would run into the court and say, hey, I saw the moon first appear. And when two people came and said, I saw the moon first appear, and they were interrogated, they were given a hard time to prove that they had seen it, and they were forced to answer the questions, answer very tough questions. And if they couldn't answer the questions, then they were set aside as not being able to certify the new moon, regardless. After this process, the Beis Din would announce, now this is the end of the previous month and the beginning of the new month. By the way, the Kohen Gadol usually sat on the high court. Did you know that? The high priest sat on the top court, but there was one case that he was never allowed to adjudicate, and that is the case of the leap year. Because for the Kohen Gadol, he is thinking about his coming Yom Kippur experience. Will it be cold or hot on Yom Kippur? Because remember, he's going to spend the whole day hustling barefooted in the temple on stone. And so he doesn't want to be too cold. So he might say, let's allow the year to start a bit, the solar calendar to be a bit early on the Jewish calendar, or the lunar calendar should be early on the solar schedule, so that it's still summer when Yom Kippur comes, a bit like this year is. This year, Yom Kippur, it's going to be quite hot here in Georgia. Now, especially, by the way, if you're going to the outdoor minyan, good luck. Okay, hopefully will be at the indoor minyan. Are you asking a question, Reb Shmuel?
Yes, please, quick. I'll be quick. I just want to understand better the Rebbe's use of the term. It gives us a few extra days as an advance on the next year. In other words, is it that there are some extra days for which one can prepare for the next year?
Okay, so I'm going to get there. Let's get there. Let's first answer Reb Binyamin's question, which is still, Reb Binyamin wants to know, how did they set up the calendars in the Talmudic times? Okay. And so the answer is there was a leap year in Talmudic times, because this problem always happened. The value of a set calendar as organized by Rabbi Sadia Gaon was that no longer do we need witnesses to come to Beis Din and announce the new month. And no longer do we need one guy or one group of people in a central organization somewhere in Jerusalem to release a statement to the entire Jewish people internationally that now we have that this is the calendar for the coming year. Instead, what do we have? We have a calendar that was set a couple of thousand years ago that is still working every single day for us. We have at home, not me, but my father has in the home that I grew up in, a book called the 150-year calendar. And if you open it up and know how to use it, you can find any Jewish date corresponding to any secular date for the past 150 years, or however many forward and back that it allows for. So the calendar has kind of been predicted for this long. Now, Reb Shmuel, coming to what you asked, what does the Rebbe mean when he says you have a couple of advanced extra days? It's similar. It works like this. Let's do some math. I mean, what do I know about mathematics in front of you, right? But add together 354 two times, right? What is the difference between 354 times 2 and 365 times 2?
Whatever
it is. But there's still a difference. It's 22.
Yeah.
Right? It's 22. Okay. Now add 30 to the 354 times 2, to the lunar calendar times 2. Right? So instead of having 22 minus 22, right, we now have an additional 8. Is that correct?
That sounds okay. All right. So an additional 8 days before the start that you would otherwise not have before the next year begins. Before
the resumption, before the exact calibration of the lunar calendar.
Yeah.
Which means that let's say this is not exactly correct, but let's say the beginning of Rosh Chodesh April, the first day of April and the third day of Nisan are meant to calibrate, so that the holiday of Pesach will be in spring.
Mhm.
Now, what happens on year one? On year one, it works perfectly. On year two, the first day of April is on the 11th of Nisan,
Mhm.
because there's an 11-day difference. On year three, the first day of Nisan is already at the end of April.
Yeah.
April,
Yeah,
right?
I know. Yeah.
So what do we do in year four? We push in 30 days. Now you have an extra month, which allows you to start Nisan, the month of Nisan, on the 22nd of March. Did that math make sense?
Yeah, no, it's good. It not only corrects the problem of things moving forward, but the Rebbe seems to suggest that there's an additional advantage to all of this in terms of his use of the term in advance, days in advance. Like there's an extra added
Right.
bonus.
So instead of having to recalibrate every second year, now you only have to recalibrate every third or fourth year.
Mhm.
Right? Because you have 8 days early too.
Mhm.
You have an extra 8 days at the beginning. Okay, but you are touching onto something very important. Section C will discuss the Kabbalistic value of those extra days.
Okay. Sorry for interrupting before. I thought you had finished your response to Benjamin. But
You are more than welcome to interrupt.
All right.
Diana, let's get a question and then we're going straight forward. Otherwise, I will be kicked off the internet for talking too much.
You said Nissan was in March. How is Nissan in March?
That was just in the example that we gave of how the calibration of 3 years of a lunar calendar works out with the solar calendar. So usually Nissan should be in April. On the year that you have a leap year, Nissan will be early in March, which means that we will be sending out the order form for matzahs in like February time, instead of sending out in early March, something like that. And that also means that the people who are making matzahs are making them not in Cheshvan or Kislev, but rather they're already starting in Elul and Tishrei. Because they're also working. Sorry, they're actually working later. They're not starting in Cheshvan and Kislev. They're starting in Kislev or Teves because they have an extra month later on. Okay, let's move forward. Section B.
One other thing about the Jewish calendar: 1 year Hanukkah is in January, so there's no Hanukkah in December. Did you know that?
That's right. There can be a solar year that has no calendar, that has 2 Hanukkahs. That has happened. I have seen that happen. That was once a trick question in school.
My husband figured that out. I was like really surprised. So Hanukkah, what do you mean?
Your husband has figured it out. Good on him. Okay, let's go. Section B, we're on page 8 in the student handbook. And I'm going to ask Carla, will you please read for us 1, 2, 3 paragraphs from the Rebbe's Sikha. We are compared to the moon. Go for it.
We are compared to the moon. This teaches us a lesson. What is the difference between the sun and the moon? The sun shines every day in the exact same fashion, while the moon fluctuates. Sometimes it grows and sometimes it shrinks. The Jewish people are compared to the moon. First of all, as mentioned earlier, we are the smallest of the nations from a perspective of numbers. This was the case throughout the generations, including in the days of King Solomon when, quote, the moon was full, close quote, and many lands paid tribute to Solomon. Nonetheless, from the perspective of quantity, the Israelites were a very small number in comparison to the many multitudes of the nations. But moreover, every person experiences change.
Of Israel are compared to a moon. How so? Because we've always been a small nation. And secondly, because we experience these rises and declines, waxing and waning like the moon. It comes, it goes, it comes, it goes. And every person has in their life times where they're up and times where they're down, times where things are changing. let's continue with the differences in serving God on page 9, and let's get Juan. Will you? Juan has a question.
Yeah, a comment. In the sense, the mitzvah or the reflection of the light is pretty much the same thing with like the moon. The moon reflects the light, and the Jewish people should reflect the light as well.
Very good. Very, very good. Yes. Yes. The moon is a receiver of light, and we are a receiver from God. Similar, often given to the analogy of a husband and wife. The husband gives to the wife. God is the husband, and he gives to us. The Jewish people are the wife of God, in a way. Let's get Reb Shmuel will bring you back up to the front of the table. Can you read for us difference in serving to God? And I'm going to ask you to read 1, 2, a whole bunch of paragraphs until the page, all the way till the end of the section, it seems.
All right.
Off you go.
Likewise, in our servants of God, there are things which change, like the moon, and things which remain the same, like the sun. For a Jewish person, there are certain matters which are fundamentals. For example, if something is expressly commanded in the code of Jewish law, and all the more so in the written Torah, obviously changes will not occur. But something that is a rabbinic decree, or possibly a minor issue, it is possible that he will be more meticulous when in places where he is recognized, while not being as careful while traveling and while in places where he is less recognized. He might forego particulars like Chalav Yisrael and Pas Yisrael. He knows that his location makes no difference from and weekday. If he could state a falsehood during the week, despite the prohibition, why should he refrain from lying on Shabbat? The answer is that the entire world is elevated on Shabbat, and therefore he is elevated as well. And this is expressed in the fact that on Shabbat, he will not state a falsehood. Likewise, there are daily fluctuations as well. When a person is in the midst of regard to encroaching on other businesses, gossip, and so on, when he needs to ensure his family's livelihood.
This is it's a fantastic couple of paragraphs. These paragraphs carry a lot of weight, and I think it's worth holding on to these pages just to review them on a once in a while basis and download, take in, and inculcate some of the lessons. One of the things that we can notice is that what's a sin? Is it a sin for one person is not a sin for another. For one person who is born into the Jewish lifestyle and used to everything, performs every detail, but then slacks off in a small area, in what he thinks is small. What does he know if it's small or not? He thinks it's small. For him, that's a sin. For someone who never knew anything Jewish and then chooses to violate something which perhaps is considered a fundamental of Judaism, maybe, and for that person, maybe that's not even considered a sin, because what does he know about anything altogether? He never had an opportunity to know. Sins are kind of subjective in a way. Of course, you can't go ahead and violate whatever you want, because nevertheless, it's kind of different. It's kind of subjective in a little way. But then we have this next thing, which is that the ignoramus won't lie on Shabbos, which tells you in a way that Shabbos has this aura that elevates the person who keeps it. And as you keep the Shabbos and it makes a space around you, you find that it might even leave a little touch into the rest of the week. You can't be sure, right? We don't rely on the ignoramus to tell us if it was tired or not during the week, but on Shabbos, he would never lie. A fascinating little thing that happens over there, that the atmosphere of Shabbos helps you on Shabbos, and it might even touch you for the rest of the week. But now we move into what I think is going to be the crux of our conversation, and that is the leap year of the soul. And here we are, we're on page 12. And it goes like this. This is the lesson of a leap year. In order to fill the gap of the lunar year, it is necessary to add a month which will not only fill the gap, but be a supplement as well for the future. When in a state of change, a state of decline, our tshuva must be such that not only will we behave as we did before the decline, but we will be on a higher level. The Alter Rebbe in Tanya cites the statement of Tana Devei Eliyahu: if a person committed a sin and deserves the death penalty before God, what should he do to live? If he was accustomed to studying one page, he should study two. If he was accustomed to studying one chapter, he should study two. As explained at length in the books of Jewish ethics about Teshuvah, needs to be extra careful in the matters in which he failed in the past. So in order to fill the lack of the lunar year, it's not enough to add the missing days. We need to add an entire month. As we said earlier, a year must consist of entire months, resulting in a year with far more days than a regular one. This is called a Shana Tamima, a complete year. In other words, we gain true completion and wholeness in our service to our Creator, specifically when after a decline, we make an extra effort to gain even more than we had achieved earlier. Take the following lesson. The lunar calendar is lacking. When it's lacking, we add a full month to realign it with the solar calendar. And that adds more days than we actually missed. In our own lives, when we find that we're lacking in a certain area in our service of our Father in heaven, we should strive to gain far more in order to correct it. You know, when you're driving a car and you veer off the path just a little, you don't just a little veer back. Maybe you should, but you don't. You always kind of jerk back, and a lot back. One of the standard causes, one of the good causes of a nice car accident, God forbid, that jerk back. You pull back really quick. Why? Because you know that you're off the path you want to get on. There's this classic story that's told. The Alter Rebbe had a student who came to him once because his son had taken up horse riding. Now, keep in mind, in those times, horse riding was not considered to be a very appropriate behavior for a nice Jewish boy. It was more of a non-Jewish activity in those times. So the father is looking for a path of how he can mend his son's ways. So he brings his son with him to the Alter Rebbe, to the first Chabad Rebbe, and he tells the Rebbe the predicament. So the Rebbe tells the child, he says to the boy, you enjoy riding horses, right? Yeah. And what do you find so fascinating about riding a horse? He says, well, the time it takes me to walk from A to B, if I gallop there, I get there so much faster. Said the Rebbe to the child, and what happens when you realize that you're galloping in the wrong direction? The answer, that's the end of the story. The answer is, you turn around, you gallop back really fast. But the moment you realize that you're off path and you turn around, that's your moment of return. And then you put in extra effort, pedal to the metal, to get closer to where you want to be. And you use the momentum of the return to push you forward. How more appropriate can it be to talk about this right before the month of the high holidays, right before Rosh Hashanah? We're in the month of Elul, and Elul is called the month of the king in the field. It's an appropriate time for all of us to connect with God, to connect with who we really want to be connected to. Throughout the year, we go off path once in a while. But then when it comes to this month, the month of Elul, there is an added availability for us to reconnect. And as we reconnect, we set forward an example from the leap year. We put in extra effort and we push forward. What's an example of extra effort? As a classic example is a person who is accustomed to eating bread baked by a non-Jewish baker, something which in certain circumstances is permissible. During the month of the first 10 days of the month of Tishrei, the 10 days of the high holidays, it's recommended to avoid eating that kind of bread. Why? It's like nearly perfectly okay. What is the thing here? The added value is that oomph, that extra push. You're grabbing something unique and you do that too, that pushes you just a little more forward. It's 7:02 and the clock is late. Let's go to section D, renewal. And I'm going to ask Reb Shmuel if you'll read for us, please, this letter from, this is a letter from the Rebbe. Now, it's titled a public letter. The Rebbe would often write public letters to the entire Jewish people. In this letter, the Rebbe is going to talk about how some things that are set, we can use them differently and to our advantage. Let's take a look. Reb Shmuel, off you go.
Both the sun and the moon were created to give light upon the earth and to serve mankind. While the task of a human being is, to quote our sages, I was created to serve my creator, namely to serve God. There is an obvious difference between the sun and the moon in the manner of their providing light on the earth. The sun radiates its light in the same constant manner without perceptible change from day to day. On the other hand, the moon renews itself, which is why the moon is also called chodesh, new, as it reappears or is reborn, olad, at the beginning of each month, first as a narrow crescent and then becoming fuller and brighter from day to day until it attains its complete fullness and brightness on the 14th or 15th day of the month. In other words, the sun and the moon symbolize two different characteristics. The sun represents the element of sameness and constancy, with the declaration of Modeh Ani, acknowledging and thanking God, the living and eternal King. That day, full inspiration and joy, so much so that the holiness of Shabbat should be felt every day of the week, and the teachings of the festivals should be an inspiration throughout the year. Thus, for example, it is explained by our sages that the season of our freedom should be experienced daily in terms of freedom from all.
Is just fantastic. And what happens here? In this case, in this comment, the Rebbe is telling us that there are some things which are regular and there are some things which come once in a while. The things that are regular, we have to do them. We have to keep them. We stick to them and we perform them. We hold them tight and we're with them all the time. But then there are the booster shots. There are the boosters that come in every couple of months and lift us up and give us more energy and give us a new vibrancy and a new energy. And in a way, we borrow from one and bring to the other. We take from the energy of the new, of the exciting, and we invest it into our regular. You know, at the end of next month, at the end of Tishrei, after nearly 20 days of celebration, some of us are going to turn around and say, hey, I don't want this holiday season to leave. I'm enjoying the prayers every day. I'm enjoying the Hallel. I'm enjoying the dancing and singing. I'm enjoying the festive meals. What do? We say, what can I take from this holiday season and bring it into my weekday, into my Shabbos, into my week cycle? Because we got to hold on to that. That's going to, from the end of Tishrei all the way through till Nisan, till April, we're going to be dry of holidays, unless you celebrate some extra ones, make some new excitement in between. But on a general level, there's no more biblical holiday in between. So we now, right at the beginning, look forward and think, what am I going to grab from the holiday season and incorporate into my week cycle? This, my friends, has been a fantastic class. There's a couple of takeaways here. One takeaway is in the month of Elul, it's a month of return time, a month of teshuvah time. Let's find the areas where we were lacking and overcompensate in them now. You might think to yourself, hey, it's a bit hypocritical for me to do X and Y now. I didn't do it at all the whole year. That's the message of the leap year. You didn't have it for the past 2 years. Overcompensate now to boost yourself forward for the next spot. If it's praying once a day, if it's keeping the Shabbat for an extra 20 minutes, if it's sitting down for a Shabbos meal instead of turning on the you-know-what. Whatever the situation is, whatever the case is, each person in their own life can grab a bit more godliness and pump it into their lifestyle and overcompensate for what they've been missing. And that, my friends, is the blessing for this year. May the year of 5782 be greeted with an overcompensation of goodness to pay off that which was missing in the past year and a bit, and to push us forward into a year of overflowing blessing this coming year, 5782. Good Shabbos.